The gunshot split the evening silence before anyone even understood what was happening. One moment, the CEO's daughter was standing on the sidewalk under a flickering street lamp, frozen in fear as an armed stranger stepped toward her. The next, a single father, worn, tired, and unnoticed by most of the world, lunged toward her, pulling her close, turning his own body into a shield. As the bullet tore through his shoulder and he collapsed, bleeding onto the cold pavement, his only words were a trembling whisper, "You're safe, kid." And in that heartbeat, as people screamed and the world spun, two families who had lived in very different worlds were forced together by one act of pure, terrifying bravery. Before we continue, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you believe in kindness, sacrifice, and second chances. It truly helps us create more stories that touch the heart. What no one realized in the chaos was that the man who had taken the bullet had never expected his life to collide with the life of a billionaire CEO. His name was Daniel Reyes, 36 years old, father of one, and a man who had been fighting battles long before he stepped between the CEO's daughter and the violent stranger. Daniel had been working 2 jobs to keep a roof over his son's head. He had been running on hope, exhaustion, and the love only a single parent could understand. The world had been unkind to him, but he had continued anyway, quietly, humbly, and without complaint. And the girl he saved that night, 17-year-old Emily Harper, was the cherished only daughter of Alexander Harper, a man whose wealth had built empires, but whose heart had been hardened by years of loss, betrayal, and carrying his company and his loneliness on his back. As the ambulance sirens wailed and lights flashed across the dark street, Emily knelt beside Daniel, trembling. She had always believed that people were selfish, that everyone took advantage of her father's power, that loyalty was a luxury reserved for stories and strangers. But when she looked down at this man who had never met her, who had thrown himself into danger without a moment's hesitation, something inside her cracked open. She pressed her hands against his bleeding shoulder, sobbing as paramedics rushed around her. She didn't know him. He didn't know her, and yet he had almost died for her. The doctors later said Daniel's survival was a miracle. The bullet had passed dangerously close to vital organs. He lost a lot of blood. He had pushed himself far beyond normal human instinct. When he finally regained consciousness in a cold, white hospital room, his arm bandaged tightly and pain pulsing through every nerve, he didn't think about himself. His first thought was of his son, 10-year-old Lucas, who was probably waiting for him at home, heating leftover noodles in the microwave, wondering why his dad hadn't returned from work. Daniel didn't expect anyone to be sitting there. He didn't expect the expensive suit, the heavy watch, or the man with steel gray eyes staring at him with a mixture of guilt, relief, and confusion. Alexander Harper was not used to being powerless. He was used to giving orders, solving problems, buying solutions. But nothing he had ever done, not a business deal, not a victory, not a $1 million contract, felt as humbling as sitting beside the poor single father who had saved his daughter's life. Daniel tried to sit up, wincing. He didn't understand why a CEO, the Alexander Harper, was standing in his hospital room. But Alexander didn't speak. Not yet. He just watched Daniel struggle, watched him grit his teeth, watched him fight to be strong even while injured. It reminded Alexander of himself in ways he didn't want to admit. Fighting alone, bearing too much weight, pretending he was fine even when the world felt impossible. Over the next few days, the story of the shooting spread across the city. A nameless single dad who dove in front of a bullet to save the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the country. People called him a hero. News anchors praised him. Social media celebrated him. But Daniel didn't care for attention. All he cared about was healing enough to hold his son again, to return to work, to not fall behind on rent. He was grateful Emily survived. That was enough. But Alexander wasn't satisfied with gratitude. He felt he owed a debt he could never repay. Every night he replayed the scene in his head, his daughter in danger, the gun, the man who stepped in without hesitation. Alexander had spent much of his life protecting Emily from the superficial world of wealth, shielding her from fake friends and corporate predators. But for all his power, he couldn't protect her in the one moment she needed him most. A stranger, the kind of man Alexander's security would normally ignore or overlook, had stepped in instead. Alexander began visiting Daniel every day. Sometimes Emily came with him, quiet but observant, watching Daniel with strange admiration. She told her father repeatedly that she wanted to help him somehow. She didn't want him to go back to struggling. She didn't want him to disappear back into the shadows of the world just because the headlines eventually moved on to something else. Daniel, however, was uncomfortable with the attention. He had grown used to being invisible. He didn't trust kindness easily. Life had taught him that help often came with strings attached. And yet, there was something genuine in the way Emily thanked him. Something sincere in the way Alexander asked about Lucas. Something unspoken in the silence that hung between their worlds. The Harpers weren't just trying to repay a debt. They were trying to understand a man who had risked everything without asking for anything. When Daniel was finally discharged, he returned home to his small apartment, his arms still in a sling, his steps heavy with pain. Lucas ran to him, hugging him tightly, his small hands trembling. Daniel promised him everything would be okay, even though he had no idea how he was supposed to work with his injury. He couldn't lift heavy equipment. He couldn't return to his construction job. He couldn't even carry groceries without wincing. Bills piled up. Rent loomed. Fear crept slowly into his chest. What Daniel didn't expect was the knock on his door a week later. When he opened it, Alexander and Emily stood there, not with cameras, not with reporters, not with flashy gifts, but with a quiet sincerity that filled the hallway with warmth. They didn't offer him charity. They offered him a job, one that respected his dignity, one that didn't exploit his injury, one that would allow him to take care of Lucas without sacrificing his health. Daniel resisted at first, insisting he hadn't saved Emily for a reward. But Alexander made it clear this wasn't a reward. It was an opportunity, a thank you in the form of a future. Daniel finally accepted. He became an internal safety consultant for Harper Industries, using his years of experience from construction and odd jobs to help improve workplace safety protocols. It was a job where his voice mattered, something he had never experienced before. Slowly, he settled into a new routine. Slowly, Lucas adapted to seeing his father happier, less burdened, less exhausted. And slowly, unexpectedly, the two families began to intertwine. Emily admired the way Daniel talked to people, with respect, patience, and humility, even when they outranked him. She admired the way he fought through pain quietly, determined to be strong for his son. Lucas adored Emily, who treated him like a little brother instead of the kid of an employee. Alexander found himself relying on Daniel's judgment, trusting him more than he trusted most executives. And Daniel, though still guarded, found comfort in Alexander's growing respect for him. Months passed, seasons changed, and the invisible line that had once separated their worlds began to fade. Daniel attended Emily's school events. Alexander came to Lucas's football games. Emily often sat on the couch with Lucas, helping him with homework while Daniel and Alexander talked about challenges, fatherhood, survival, and the strange twists of life that had brought them together. Then came the evening that sealed their bond forever. Emily struggled with anxiety after the shooting, something she hid well but couldn't fully escape. One night she had a severe panic attack after a loud crash outside her window. She called Daniel instead of her friends, instead of anyone else. She trusted his voice, his calm strength, the reassurance he had shown the night he saved her. Daniel rushed over with Lucas, sitting beside her until she could breathe again. Alexander arrived later, shaken and grateful beyond words. He realized then that Daniel had not just saved Emily's life once, he was saving her a little more each day. And through it all, Daniel's presence softened Alexander's hardened edges. It reminded him what loyalty looked like when it wasn't bought. It reminded Emily that not all heroes wore badges or suits. Some wore faded jackets and tired smiles. If this story is touching you, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It truly helps us continue making meaningful stories for you. But the moment that changed everything happened almost a year after the shooting. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. Daniel was helping Lucas with a school project in the Harper family garden while Emily sat nearby reading. Alexander stepped outside, watching them with warmth he never thought he'd feel again. He saw Lucas laughing freely. He saw Daniel relaxed, the weight of survival lifted from his shoulders. He saw Emily safe, smiling, alive and stronger than she had been in months. And Alexander realized, with a heaviness in his throat, that the man who had taken a bullet for his daughter had become more than a hero. He had become family. He walked toward them, eyes damp, voice steady but soft, and asked Daniel a question that would change all their lives forever. Not about business, not about safety, not about repayment, but about stepping into something deeper, something permanent, something built on gratitude, loyalty, and the kind of love that doesn't fade. Before the ending, please comment below, what would you do if a stranger saved your child's life? I'd love to hear your thoughts. In the end, both families discovered something they had been missing: connection, healing, and the reminder that humanity still existed in the most unexpected corners of the world. Daniel gained stability, purpose, and a circle of people who refused to let him struggle alone. Alexander and Emily gained not just safety, but companionship, humility, and a bond forged in sacrifice. Together, they rebuilt pieces of themselves that had been broken long before the night of the shooting. And though life continued with challenges and uncertainty, one truth remained unshakable, echoing stronger and stronger as time passed. Sometimes the people who change our lives forever are the ones we never see coming.